What's up, YouTube? Got a little Cataclysm guide lined up here for you. Figured I'd start off with Resto Druid, but I'm probably going to do a guide for all the other healers as well. Unless I'm a lazy piece of shit. I don't know, we'll have to see. But normally I only do guides for healers that I intend on playing. But I feel like it's going to be important for me to do one for all the healers this time around, because unlike in Season of Dogshit and Wrath the Shit King, healing is going to be complicated in this expansion, because the class design is more complex, the raid bosses are more difficult, and they live for like 9 minutes. So every little optimization you can make to your healing is really going to add up in the grand scheme of things, I think. Now, before we begin, I do want to mention that this guide is mainly going to be about raid healing, not dungeon healing. I will touch on dungeon healing a little bit, but I don't want that to be the focus. And to be honest with you, I don't think dungeon healing will be too complicated for Resto Druid. It's one of the easier healers for that kind of a thing, so I think you'll be fine. Let's start off by taking a look at the major changes for Resto Druid and Kata. So the first thing you get is a healing circle called Efflorescence, and it activates when you cast Swiftmend on someone. Kind of a weird change, in my opinion, because it turns Swiftmend into more of a raid heal instead of a spot heal, tank heal ability, which is pretty dumb, but Blizzard has done weirder things in the past, so I suppose this change is fine. The next change is that Innervate is trash when you use it on other players. It only gives them like 5% of their mana or something, and that is fantabulous, because I hate giving my Innervate to other people. So from now on, you're only going to use Innervate on yourself like God intended. You also have this new mastery buff that you have to maintain for the whole fight, which is kind of annoying since you already have Life Bloom to maintain. But eventually you'll get used to it, and it's not too bad because there is a talent that makes it so that Nourish refreshes the duration of Life Bloom. So you can kind of kill two stones with one bird by doing that. Tranquility is no longer a party-based heal, thank God. And Life Bloom can only be used on one player now unless you're in tree form. And speaking of tree form, this ability got a lot of changes, but the most noticeable change is just how fucking ugly it is. Look at this abomination. What were they thinking? The fucking land whales that I match with on Tinder look better than this shit. Like, it's like Blizzard took a dump in my eyes. However, there is a glyph you can use to change it back to the regular look, so it's all good. But there is another change that made the tree form that is much more impactful. It is now a buff that lasts for 30 seconds and is on a 3-minute cooldown, and it is extremely difficult to use properly. So I will be going into much detail on how I believe you're supposed to use this ability later on into the guide. For now, though, I'm just going to start off by briefly talking about the talents, and I've thrown them up on the screen here for you. This is the main talent build that you're going to be running because this is the one that gives you the most mana efficiency. And you only have 1 point in this whole spec that you can move around. You can put it in either of these 3 talents right here, depending on what you feel you need for any specific boss fight. But if you don't want to be a nerd, you can just put the point into Magic Dispel and call it a day, which is probably what I'll be doing because I ain't no fucking nerd. I'm a himbo pog daddy, and everybody knows that. Now, there is another build that you can play, but I can't really see it being used in this first raid tier. It's this build right here, and what this build does is it maximizes the HPS of your HOTS, but you sacrifice a bunch of mana to do it. So you only ever use this build on bosses that you can't really go on, like Shanox maybe in Firelands. I don't know, we'll just have to see. And in terms of glyphs, they're all pretty self-explanatory except for glyph of wild growth. The problem with this glyph is that there will be certain damage patterns on bosses where using this glyph will feel awful. Essentially, if you're finding that the raid keeps getting topped up right when wild growth comes off cooldown, then you probably shouldn't use this glyph. And you also need to be able to hit 6 people with wild growth consistently and without overhealing. So if you're on a boss where you're only hitting 3 or 4 people with wild growth, then don't use this glyph. Alakir is probably a good boss where you'd want to use this glyph because phases 2 and 3 are perfect for it. Let's talk about the gameplay now. So here's the healing per mana and healing per second breakdowns for each spell. And right off the bat, you'll notice that these 4 spells are at the top of both lists. And all that means is that your basic healing strategy is actually very simple. All you're going to do is maintain 3-stack life bloom on the tank, use wild growth and swift mend as much as possible, and then you're going to dump all of your mana with rejuve. It's as simple as that. However, you won't be able to use rejuve the same way that you did in Wrath. You're not just going to be able to spam it on people who are full health. And the reason for that is because in Kata, your mana bar really matters. So you can't just be overhealing like crazy with rejuve. You're going to have to wait for the damage to happen and then press rejuve rather than preemptively using it. And you won't be able to use rejuve every single time someone takes damage because you won't have the mana for it. So you'll have to plan out each boss fight ahead of time and figure out the best times to press rejuve. As for the rest of these spells, you want to use them as little as possible, mainly for emergency situations. So for example, if someone's getting pwned, you can throw out a healing touch on them to save them, but you don't want to use healing touch more than you have to because it's not mana efficient. And as for nourish, you're going to want to use it when one of these criteria are met. Don't get carried away spamming nourish until you have lots of raid gear. Just because it has a low mana cost doesn't mean you should spam it without thinking. And as for Omen of Clarity procs, the most important thing is to just use them right away. Ideally, you want to use them on Healing Touch, but if there's no Healing Touch opportunities present, then you can use it on Regrowth instead. And that just about wraps up the easy part of playing Resto Druid. Now let's move on to the hard part. Alright. This is going to be very difficult to explain, but the way I'm going to do it is I'll show you 2 basic healing strategies, and then things will progressively get harder from there. And keep in mind that what I'm going to say will teach you how to use tree form for raiding specifically, not for dungeons, but I will talk about dungeons briefly at the end. And unfortunately, I don't have any raid healing footage because this private server that I'm on is so fucking cringe. Like, they keep asking for ridiculous item levels for these raids, and it's actually disgusting. Like, this is why I hate men, honestly. Their standards are just too goddamn high. They're always looking for turbo chads with like 380 item level, and they won't even give the little guy with 365 item level a chance. It makes me sick, honestly, but it is what it is, so we'll just have to make do with this dungeon healing footage here. So the 2 strats for tree form are the Life Bloom spam strat and the Rejuve spam strat. On some bosses, you'll probably have to do a bit of both, but I don't think that'll be very common. Let's talk about the Life Bloom spam strat first, since that's when you'll be using most of the time, since it's the most mana efficient. But it's also the strat that's going to make you want to self-harm because it's very difficult and requires a lot of focus and quick decision making, which is going to be rough, but here's what it looks like. You're going to press Nourish on the tank to refresh your mastery, hop into tree form, press Wild Growth, and then Rejuve Swiftmend, and then Life Bloom on 4 people. 3, 4. Wild Growth will come off cooldown, so you're going to use that again. And then you Life Bloom on 6 people this time. 3, 4, 5, 6. Wild Growth will come off cooldown. Use that. Then keep refreshing Life Blooms, keep refreshing. And then as your tree form is coming to an end, you're going to use Swiftmend into Wild Growth into Tranquility. And the reason you use Tranquility at the end of your tree form is because it snapshots with the 15% healing buff that tree form gives you. Now, if that looked difficult to you, well, guess what? The proper strategy is actually a lot harder than that. The strategy I showed you is only partially correct, and it only works for consistent raid damage. However, the strategy for dealing with bursts of raid damage is a bit different. Now, the main mistake I see people make when they used tree form in original Kata is they would use it reactively, as in they would wait for the big burst of raid damage to happen, and then they would press tree form. You don't want to do that, because tree form's healing ramps up throughout the entire 30-second duration, whereas most high damage events on raid bosses only last for about 15 seconds. So if you're using tree form to heal a big burst of raid damage, you want to press it around 10 to 15 seconds before the damage happens. Also, you won't be able to use wild growth off cooldown if you're using tree form preemptively, because there probably won't be any raid damage happening. Look at Cho'gall, for example. If you were to pop tree form right here 15 seconds before the raid damage happens, see how there's no damage happening right now except for tank damage. So when you activate tree form, you could start off by swift mending the tank, but you can't use wild growth until the raid damage actually happens. So here's the strategy that you would use. You're going to press tree form, and then press Life Bloom on 7 players this time, since you don't need the extra global for wild growth. And then you just keep refreshing these Life Blooms over and over again until the raid damage happens, which will hopefully be around here. And then you press wild growth, and then keep refreshing Life Blooms. I kind of fuck up here, but you want to keep refreshing the Life Blooms, and then Swift Mend, wild growth again, and then Trank. And that's how you do it. The main thing I want you to take away from what I'm showing you is that you don't want to let the life blooms fall off, because that is where the bulk of your healing is coming from in tree form. Now, it actually gets more complicated than what I've shown you so far, because I haven't even talked about Omen of Clarity yet. These Omen of Clarity procs are a big issue during tree form, because if you're using the procs on random people who are taking damage while simultaneously trying to maintain 6 or 7 life blooms on people, it's just not going to work. Your life blooms are going to fall off, and your ramp will be completely ruined. So I would recommend only using Omen of Clarity procs on the people that you're refreshing life bloom on. And if players who don't have life bloom on them are taking damage, then just let the other healers heal them, because you don't want to get baited into healing other players with regrowth while you're in tree form, since your life blooms are just going to fall off if you try to do that. Here's what it looks like. Alright, here's tree form while using the Omen of Clarity procs. So we hop in tree form there, we got 1 Omen of Clarity procs, used it there, and then we keep pressing life bloom, try to get life bloom on 6 players. And there's the Omen of Clarity proc, used it there, keep refreshing, use that Omen of Clarity proc right there. Alright, and do a wild growth, and to keep using the Omen of Clarity proc. And here I use Swift Mend because tree form's coming to an end. Use that last Omen of Clarity proc into a wild growth into Tranquility. Pretty difficult stuff, to be honest with you, but it actually gets even more complicated than that, because you don't want to use regrowth on someone who's full health unless you're trying to activate your mastery. So if you get an Omen of Clarity proc, but the person you're refreshing Life Bloom on is full health, then don't use the Omen of Clarity proc, just use Life Bloom instead. And also try not to use Wild Growth or Swift Mend on the same people that you're rolling Life Blooms on. It's better to spread out your healing as much as possible. And technically, there are even more optimizations you can make to tree form, such as minimizing your overhealing with all of those 3-stack Life Blooms that you're maintaining, but I think I'll leave it at that, because it's just way too much. You know, there's no fucking way anybody is going to be able to do any of this in a raid. I'm not even sure why I explained it to you. I kind of feel like an idiot, but this is a guide, and I'm here to teach you how to use these abilities, despite how seemingly pointless it is in this case, because this ability is just way too fucking difficult. But I suppose if you wanted an easier strategy for tree form, you could just focus on maintaining Life Bloom on 6 players and just kind of pretend that Omen of Clarity doesn't exist. But it's up to you, you know, whatever you want to do. Fortunately, the other way of using tree form is super easy. There will be certain bosses where the best thing to do will be to just spam rejuve in tree form instead of spamming Life Bloom. And the reason you would want to do that is because Rejuve spam is higher HPS than Life Bloom spam, and it dumps your mana bar. So if you wanted to go faster, you would do Rejuve spam. An example of a boss where you would want to do that is Ascendant Council Phase 3, because you should be going into this phase with a full bar of mana and Innervate off cooldown. Also, this phase doesn't last for very long, which means you'll never be able to go fast enough if you use the Life Bloom strat, so you'll be forced to use Rejuve instead. Lastly, I want to talk about dungeon healing a little bit. Your core healing strategy will be the same as it is for raiding, but the difference is that the tank damage will be very difficult to heal through in dungeons. So after you've got Life Bloom and Rejuve on the tank, you're going to be spamming Nourish, but Nourish is low HPS, which means you're going to be forced into spamming Healing Touch once you fall behind on the damage. And you'll also be forced to use Healing Touch on the party because they're going to be dying through Wild Growth and Swiftmend and Rejuve and Nourish, all that shit. So that's the main thing you need to understand about dungeon healing versus raid healing. You just need to not be afraid to spam Healing Touch. In a raid, you would never want to spam Healing Touch because it's not mana efficient, but in dungeons you'll have to. Just don't spam Regrowth whenever you do. You'll go in 2 milliseconds. And as for tree form in dungeons, well, you can just about ignore everything that I previously told you about using this ability, because in dungeons, when you use tree form, you just want to keep healing the way that you normally would outside of tree form. Don't worry about trying to maintain Life Bloom on people unless the incoming damage is low, because it's just too risky to maintain Life Blooms on people when the tank is constantly getting destroyed. Also, the damage in dungeons is super random, and the Life Bloom spam strat is really bad at dealing with random damage, so just don't overthink it. Okay, in dungeons, just try to pop tree form as soon as big damage happens, because tree form is on the global cooldown, which means if you pop it too late, somebody might die. Any hoosers, let's go over a few bosses, because I feel like people are really going to have a hard time with this. And we'll start off with Cho'gall. Now, this boss is pretty easy to heal from the looks of it, but it can become very not easy to heal if you don't manage your mana properly. Your goal on this boss is to have a full bar of mana going into the last phase, because the last phase is a huge HPS check. So how are we going to accomplish that? Well, the first step to managing your mana on any boss is figuring out how many innervates you can squeeze in throughout the fight. And according to this little video here of Heroic Cho'gall, the boss is around 9 minutes long, which means you should be able to squeeze in 3 innervates if you play it correctly. But keep in mind that you only have roughly 2 minutes to use your first innervate, because there's no point in having your third innervate come off cooldown right as the boss is about to die. You need at least 30 seconds to spend all of that mana. Anyways, the main thing you need to know about Cho'gall is that there's only one ability that does a lot of damage in the first 2 phases. It's these little elementals that he absorbs. Fire one makes him do big damage to the tank, and the Shadow Elemental makes him do big damage to the raid. And I don't know if there will be a DBM timer for this ability, but if there isn't, then all you have to do is be aware of when the elementals spawn. The damage is going to start happening 15 seconds after the elemental spawns, so when you use tree form, you don't want to wait for the damage to happen. You're going to want to press tree form the instant you see the Shadow Elemental spawn, so that you can begin stacking up Life Blooms in preparation for the raid damage. Now, you're only going to get 2 tree forms and 2 tranquilities on this fight, and I'll explain when you're going to be using those in a little bit. But the most important thing you're going to need to know for this boss is that the raid is going to be stacking up and spreading out constantly. So for the first big hit of raid damage, you're going to be stacked. For the next one, you're going to be spread. Then the one after that, you're going to be stacked again. And it's just going to repeat like that until you get to phase 3. And you might be wondering, why is that important? Well, there are only 2 healers that are good at healing spread out raid damage: Priest and Druid. You're going to want to use that to your advantage. on this boss because you're not going to have enough mana to just spam rejuve every single time one of these big bursts of raid damage happens, since we're trying to save as much mana as possible for phase 3. So our goal will only be to use rejuve when it's most necessary, and that would be when everyone is spread out, because the other two healers, the paladin and the shaman, won't be able to heal as much during the spread out phase. In fact, if I were playing a holy paladin, I would be doing hardly any healing at all during the spread out phase. I would literally just be waiting for the whole raid to stack up so that I could spam Holy Radiance. What this means is that Cho'gall is very much a taking turns boss. The paladins and the shaman are supposed to pump healing during the stacked up parts, and the druid and priests are supposed to pump healing during the spread out parts. Shamans and priests will probably do a little bit of both, but you see my point. You just want to pump most of your healing during the spread out portion of the fight, and when the raid is stacked, don't even use rejuve if you don't have to. I mean, you can just use wild growth and swiftmend to call it a day. Let me just briefly commentate over this video so you get a good idea of what you should be doing. I'll probably skip around a bit because I don't want this video to be an hour long, but here we go. Alright, here's the start of the boss. So it's just tank damage at the start. You're going to keep 3-stack life bloom on the tank, rejuve, and spam nourish. Might as well because you're at full mana, so why not? And the first bit of raid damage is going to happen when you see the shadow elemental. Here it is. First the portal spawns, and then there's the shadow elemental. It's 15 seconds after the portal spawns is when the raid damage starts happening. So the raid damage is going to be here. And here you would just wild growth and swiftmend and not really do much else. You mainly want the paladin and the shaman to heal through most of this. But the next big burst of raid damage is when you're gonna pump the heals, because that's gonna be the spread out part. So here's the shadow elemental again, and 15 seconds after that, people are gonna start spreading out. Here we go. Spread out. Don't stand all the way over here. You probably want to stay more central so that you can heal everyone. But here you should just be spam and rejuve, wild growth, swiftmend, and you want to try and get your mana down to about 60-70% so that you can use your first innervate. This is where you should be using your first innervate right here. This guy kind of delays his innervate too long. But yeah, and then you're going to stack up again. Here it comes for the next big burst of raid damage. This one you're not really going to do much again. But then after this raid damage happens, you're going to use tree form. So here comes the next big burst of raid damage. As soon as you see this spawn is when you want to press tree form. So I'd press tree form right now and I'd start stacking up life blooms on the range DPS. And I'd probably do 7 life blooms in this case. 7 life blooms. So you do that, and then the raid damage is going to happen right about now. And then you'd wild growth, and then you'd keep refreshing life blooms into a swiftmend, into another wild growth, into tranquility, and that will pop up the raid really nicely here. And then that's just going to repeat for a while until you get to phase 3, and you want to use your conch pot somewhere around here. You're going to want to use it like right after the raid damage happens, when everybody's stacked up. So like right here, there's raid damage, everyone's stacked up. You could use it right here, like when Cho'gall's at around 30%, because Cho'gall transitions into the next phase at 25%. So if you use your conch pot here, that would be perfect. And you should have already used your second innervate by now. So you'll have used second innervate and then your conch pot, which should bring you to around 80% mana or so. The higher the better. So that would be conch pot, and then phase 3 is going to happen here. Here's 25%. There's the phase 3 transition. And these guys get the big burst of raid damage at the same time, which is really bad. Usually this would mean a wipe. I'm kind of surprised they lived this. You're not actually supposed to get a big burst of raid damage going into phase 3. But yeah, here we go. So you would just spam rejuve and wild growth and swiftmend again until bloodlust is popped, which is right here, I guess. And then you would hop in the tree form, do the life bloom spam strategy on the range DPS. And after your tree form finishes, and you'd also use Trank in tree form. So after your tree form's done, you'd be sitting at around probably 70, 60, 70% mana. And then you're going to rejuve spam until you go You're going to use your third innervate, and then you're going to continue rejuve spamming until you go again, and then the fight will be over. And that's it. That's how you heal Cho'gall. This third phase here, it looks pretty terrifying, but I promise you it won't be too bad if you go into it with a full bar mana. Like, if you have a full bar mana, you basically cannot be touched. You can heal through basically anything. So as long as you do that, you'll be fine. Alright, let's knock out Alec here real quick. So this boss is going to live for around 8.5 minutes, which means you've got to use your first innervate very quickly. And healing the first phase is going to be the hardest part because you want to do it without spending too much mana. You want to try to be around 80% mana with innervate on cooldown going into phase 2, which depending on lightning strike RNG can be easy or hard to do. But the main thing is to just get a good tree form and tranquility going into phase 1. And I'd recommend waiting for the first wind burst to happen and then press tree form the instant you see a lightning strike in your near vicinity. And don't do the life bloom spam strategy with your tree form in phase 1. It's just too risky with all the RNG damage that's happening. And it's better to just spam rejuve and then use tranquility when the wind burst happens. Also, the tank healing situation might be a little bit weird for phase 1 because only a few healers will be in range of the tank, and you'll probably be one of them. So if you find that you're constantly falling behind on tank healing, don't be afraid to throw out the occasional nourish or healing touch. Okay, here's the start of the fight. So it's just tank damage at the start, and there's only going to be 3 healers healing the tank. One to your left, one to your right, and then you. So you might have to use nourish a little bit more liberally on the tank in phase 1. So just keep that in mind. But here's the wind bursts, and the wind bursts happen every 25 seconds. So if you pop tree form as you're getting knocked back here from the first wind burst, it should still be up for the second knockback. And then you can use tranquility after the second knockback. But for this tree form, like if you pop it here, you're just going to wild growth, swiftmend, rejuve, you know. And the problem with popping it right as the wind burst happens is that you could get fucked by RNG because these lightning strikes that happen, they might not even like happen in your area. They might happen on the other side of the platform, and then you're kind of screwed, right? But if you get bad lightning strike RNG, you could just spam life bloom on people instead of using rejuve. But it's also kind of bad to do that because of RNG. But luckily this guy did get a lightning strike here, so if you were in tree form right now, you would just rejuve these people. And I think there's another lightning strike that happens here. Yep, that one. So you'd be able to rejuve those people. And then here's the second wind burst, so there's going to be more damage. You're going to get hit by this wind burst here. You'd still be in tree form. You knock back, wild growth, swiftmend, tranquility right now. And that would have been a really good tree form. So you could use tree form like that, or you could wait for a lightning strike to happen in your near vicinity and then pop tree form. But depends on how much RNG you want to deal with. If you want to like play the odds, you could just pop tree form right when the wind burst happens. That's probably what I'll be doing. But yeah, that's phase 1. You probably want to save your NS for when a lot of people get chained. It will almost certainly happen. Because when people get chained like this, someone's going to die really fast, like Adam here. So I'd probably just save NS for when this situation happens. But yeah, that's pretty much it for phase 1. It's not too bad. It's more of a mechanics check than anything. I was like, let's get to phase 2 here. Phase 2 happens at 80%. And you want to be around 80% mana. So you will have wanted to use innervate during phase 1. I'll pop you back up. And then just spend some mana down to around 80% would be good. Don't do what this guy's doing and not using innervate for some reason. This guy's way too low on mana going into this phase. I don't know why he's doing that. But whatever. So at the start of this phase, not much really happening. Just use Wild Growth and Swiftmend off cooldown. Don't really use Rejuve. Not until the damage starts ramping up. And when the damage does start ramping up, you want to use Rejuve on the melee DPS because the Holy Paladin and the Resto Shaman will be using Healing Rain and Holy Radiance on the range stack because that's where most of the people are going to be. And you see how the Healing Rain's not hitting the melee over here. So what you want to avoid is you want to avoid the melee dying faster than the ranged, because if the melee die faster than the ranged, the Holy Paladin might try to use Holy Radiance on the melee, which is bad. That's like inefficient to do that. So your job as a Resto Druid is just to maintain Rejuve on the melee DPS and the tanks for this entire phase. Not the entire phase, sorry. Once the damage ramps up, then you want to maintain Rejuve on the melee DPS and the tank for the rest of the phase. That's your goal. And you are going to use Tree Form during this phase, and you ideally want to use it during Lust. I don't know exactly when people are going to Lust. Hopefully around 40% when the boss is around 40%. So you can just use Tree Form during that and do the Life Bloom strategy. So as soon as Lust gets pop, Tree Form, Wild Growth, Swiftmend, Life Bloom, Life Bloom, Life Bloom, Life Bloom on a bunch of people. Do the Life Blooms on the melee DPS, by the way. And yeah, that should be fine. I don't know when this guy pops Tree Form, but probably at the wrong time. And you want to be by the end of this phase. I think you're going to have your third Innervate coming off cooldown in phase 3. So you want to be pretty close to or dead by the end of this phase so that you can use your third Innervate and give yourself some mana for phase 3. But if your Innervate is coming off cooldown too slowly, like let's say you're in phase 3 and Innervate still has 60 seconds left and you're dead that's probably bad. So if that's what's happening to you, then just try to get down to like 20% mana going into phase 3. Oh, and also your Conch Pot. You want to use Conch Pot somewhat early in phase 2 because you don't want to use it when the damage starts ramping up. It's really bad to just be kind of standing there doing nothing while the damage is fucking destroying everybody, right? So try to use Conch Pot early on in phase 2, ideally. But yeah, phase 2 isn't too bad. Just a lot of damage, you know? But like as this high raid damage is happening here, just keep Rejuve on the melee and the tank, and that should be good enough. Use Swiftmend and Wild Growth off cooldown, obviously. And yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Boss transitions at 25%. Let's see here. I can't see the boss's health. Oh, there it is. Okay. 25%. Yeah. And the boss is going to do two things in this phase. He's going to do Lightning Rod, which is like, it does a bunch of single target damage to a random person. And that ability has a 15-second cooldown. And then Windburst has a 20-second cooldown in this phase. So you want to pop Tree Form if you do get Tree Form in this phase. You might get it late in this phase, but when you do get Tree Form, you want to pop it right as that Windburst happens. Again, so your Tree Form will be up for 2 Windbursts. And you also want to save NS for the Lightning Rod. So like, let me show you here. Oh, where's a good example? Okay, so there's a Windburst right there. You'd pop Tree Form there, Wild Growth, Swiftmend, and then you'd start stacking up Life Blooms on some people. It actually doesn't matter who you put Life Bloom on in this phase because everyone's kind of stacked up on top of each other. You can use Life Bloom on whoever. And then once the Lightning Rod happens, it looks like it's happening on Adam here. So Adam's going to start taking a bunch of damage. So you're going to be in Tree Form, Life Bloom, Life Bloom, Life Bloom, Life Bloom. Here goes Adam. Adam's going to start taking damage. And you want to use your 1 free global during your Tree Form on NS to save Adam here. Okay? That way you won't have to like let your Life Blooms fall off. And then there's the second Windburst, so you use Wild Growth, Swiftmend again during that. And your Tree Form would have about 10 seconds left after the second Windburst happens, so you can keep maintaining Life Blooms and just use Trank at the end of your Tree Form. And then the rest of this phase is super simple. It's mainly tree form. Tree form is going to be the hardest part about this phase, but after you've got through tree form, it's pretty simple. Just like wild growth and swiftmend a lot. Make sure you have rejuve up immediately on every person that gets lightning rod. See, this guy can't do that because he can't actually see on his raid frames who has lightning rod. Like, you can't actually see. I'm looking at like the DBM text here to see who gets lightning rod. So it looks like Dashy has it, but you can't actually tell that Dashy has it on these raid frames. So try to make sure you have raid frames that where you can see the debuffs that people get so that you can immediately put rejuve on them as soon as they get it. And that's basically it for this phase. It's not too mana intensive, this phase, unless people do a lot of stuff wrong. Anyways, that's the end of my YouTube video. Thank you for watching. I'm going to be doing Disc Priest next, and then I'm going to do Resto Shaman after that, and then I'm going to do the Holy Paladin Guide after that. And the Holy Paladin Guide is probably going to make me kill myself. So, I won't be able to do the Holy Priest Guide since I won't be alive anymore. So, sorry, Holy Priest players, but the Holy Priest Guide is probably not going to happen. I'm going to be honest. You don't need a guide anyways. You know, Holy Priest is just 3 buttons at the end of the day. So, anyways, yeah, that's about it. Bye-bye.